Hello crafty friends, it's Alicia here with a project for Tailored Expressions. Today I'm going to show you how to create this slightly spooky scene card using some of the new Halloween products from Tailored Expressions. For my card, I used the brand new Serene Scene Halloween editions. This 8-piece die set features 2 circle dies to build a moon, an old picket fence, some flying bats and a bare tree, along with a haunted house for a piece that you can put behind the windows to light those up, and a little border die that cuts out some headstones. For the sentiment on the front of my card, I'll be using the new Ghostly Greetings stamp set and the coordinating dies. I will also be adding a sentiment to and decorating the inside of the card, and for this I am using the Insider's Halloween. Other stamps and dies that I'll be using from previous releases include Serene Scene Cutting Plate and the Serene Scene Landscapes edition, also the Splatter Background stamp and A2 Layer Stacklets. For my cardstock today, I have a 4-inch square of pineapple, a top full poppy seed card base, and a poppy seed card panel. I also grabbed some scraps in those same colors along with a piece of Oreo and sweet basil. I'll be doing some ink blending today, so I got out candy corn, pineapple, sweet basil, Oreo, and poppy seed along with coordinating blending brushes. For stamping, I got out the TE exclusive Teal Misty, Sugar Cube ink, the anti-static powder tool, and fine detail white embossing powder, along with the Just Press tool. And finally, my adhesives. I'll be using the Scotch Tape Runner, Barely Art liquid glue with the precision tip, and because I want some different depths for my scene card, I got out TE foam tape in the 1/16 and 1/8 inch thickness. And now, let's get crafty! To start off, I'm going to be doing some ink blending on that 4-inch square of pineapple cardstock. I'm going to be starting the ink blending with candy corn ink. Is that not the perfect name and color for a Halloween card? And I'm going to blend in from one end of that piece of cardstock. Since it's a square, it really doesn't matter. We'll just be blending in from opposite ends. I do concentrate the darkest of the orange at the edge and kind of just blend my brush up and let it fade out to the center. Now once I have good ink on that side, I turn it around and I'm going to get out my pineapple ink and do the same thing. And you might be wondering, why do pineapple on pineapple? It's the same color, but it actually does give just a little bit more dimension to that color. The edges are a little bit darker. Also, by doing this, instead of starting with a white piece of cardstock, it's going to take up less ink and less time blending. Next up is stamping. Since I will be using red rubber stamps, I removed the mouse pad from my Misty, and to hold my piece of poppy seed cardstock in place, I added just a little adhesive to the center. This is because I won't be able to use a magnet to hold the cardstock in place because the Splatter Background stamp fills that up completely. I'm just going to lay that kind of flat and centered against my poppy seed cardstock and pick it up with the door of my Misty. Now to make sure my embossing powder only sticks to where I want it to, I did prep the cardstock with the anti-static powder tool. And now I'm going to ink it up with Sugar Cube ink. I did want to make sure it was nice and juicy, so I ended up stamping it twice using my Just Press tool to get some nice firm pressure. And then once I had that, the thickness or the juiciness that I wanted, I brought in my fine detail white embossing powder and got that poured over the panel. I did kind of pour it a couple times, make sure everything was covered, and then I tapped off the excess onto that scrap of paper. Now I'm just going to set this panel to the side and we'll do all of the heat embossing at the same time. Using that same stamp and techniques, I'm going to be adding some splatter to my ink blended square. I did make sure this time to add a little extra anti-static powder just in case the blended ink hadn't had time to dry completely. Now while I do that, I thought I would ask you, which do you prefer? splattering with a stamp like this, or getting out your ink and actually splattering with water and a brush. For me, I definitely prefer the look of splattering, but not the mess. So I just love this background stamp. Let me know your answer in that comment section below. I do have one more thing to stamp, and that is the sentiment. For this, I'm using Happy Halloween from Ghostly Greetings, and I'll be stamping it and heat embossing it on a scrap of poppy seed cardstock. Once the sentiment was stamped and powdered, I brought in my heat tool and set all three pieces. To this day, 25 plus years later, heat embossing is one of my favorites. Now, one thing I do like to do when I'm using my heat tool is heat up the back a little bit first and then bring it to the front to finish melting the powder. Now it's time to do some die cutting. I'm going to start with the Serene Scene cutting plate on my piece of splattered poppy seed, and I got out the coordinating die for Happy Halloween. Once those pieces were cut, I did make sure to keep the inside of my frame. And now I'm going to bring in the graveyard border die from the Serene Scene Halloween editions, and I'm going to use that scrap and die cut my border. This is a great way to use up scraps, and I only had to stamp the one splattered poppy seed cardstock. Now, using some scraps of cardstock, I'm going to finish cutting the pieces for my scene. This included cutting each of the dies from the Halloween edition set and 2 sweet basil hills using the Serene Scene Landscapes die set. With all of the pieces die cut, it's time to start building the scene. To do this, I'm going to add the lights to the inside of the haunted house using some liquid glue. I did make sure not to put any on the back of the door because look, it opens up. How fun is that? Then I put together the 2 pieces for the moon. I ended up using pineapple and candy corn for these layers. And now, to add a little more depth to my rolling hills, I brought in my sweet basil ink and blending brush. And just like with the square that I ink blended, I'm going to add some color to one edge just to make it stand out a little bit from the hill beside it. I continue on with the ink blending. This time I will be adding depth and dimension to my frame and my row of headstones. And I start this one with poppy seed ink and my regular blending brush. I put a shadow across the die cut border and then on the inside and outside of the die cut frame. Then, to get a little bit more detail and help that stand out, I brought in my Bitty Blender brush and Oreo ink, and I went between each of the headstones and on the inside of the die cut frame. For this fine detail, I was very careful how far in I went with my Bitty blending brush. I really just wanted to highlight those edges so that they would stand out from each other when placed together. I want my row of headstones to be almost at the same height as the frame, so using some liquid glue, I added that piece to the back. Then I figured out where my ink blended piece would need to go on the card front, and I got that put in place with some liquid glue. I then spent some time playing with all of the pieces and layers that I wanted in the final scene, making sure that everything would fit through the frame. This did take a little extra work, moving pieces bit by bit until everything fit. When I figured out where I wanted the hills to go, I got both of those added flat to the card front with some liquid glue. I kind of held them in place where I wanted them and then slipped some glue behind each of the layers. I then figured out where I wanted my haunted house to go, and I brought my moon in and tucked it in that upper left-hand corner. Then again, I played a little bit more with the other die cut elements, deciding to go with the bare tree to the left of the haunted house. The moon and the tree got adhered flat once again with some liquid glue. And then for the haunted house, I want to start adding that dimension. So I brought in the foam tape, and this is the 1/16 inch thickness. This is going to pop it up, but just a little bit. I added pieces to the back and then pulled the release paper and got that put in place. Then for the frame itself, which I want to be popped up even more on the card, I brought in the 1/8 inch thickness foam tape and I got some added to the back. This was a little too wide to put on the sides and the top as is, so I cut that in half with my scissors until I had a complete frame all the way around. Then when I went to put it on the card, I placed it very gently at first, making sure I had an even border around the edges, and then I pressed it firmly into place. To finish the front of the card, I added 2 of the die-cut bats and the die-cut sentiment. Because the card already had so much dimension, I did decide to adhere this flat to the poppy seed frame. So I brought back in my liquid glue, added some to the back, and placed it in the lower left corner. To finish the card off and use some of those leftover die-cut pieces, I decorated the inside. I did this by cutting one of the Halloween insiders with the third from largest A2 layer stacklets. Then I placed the 2 fences in the lower corners of my sentiment piece and the bat in the upper left. Once the fences had dried, I trimmed off the excess with some scissors and added that to the inside of the card. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch today's video. If you enjoyed the process, a thumbs up is appreciated, and if you're not already a subscriber, we do hope you'll click on the button below so you are the first to know about our latest videos. To find out more about the products I used today, you can check out the links in the description box or visit the Tailored Expressions online store at tailoredexpressions.com.